Lenois back with you on the Green Mountain Mornings program this Tuesday, August the 29th. We've got Harmony Birch of the Brattleboro Reformer in here. How's it going, Harmony?
It's going well.
Did you have any problems getting in here this morning? You know, they're closing down William Street. Have they started doing that yet?
Yes, they have.
Okay, good. Yeah. See, I don't have until, again, I say this many times, until Saga Communications approves my capital request for a traffic helicopter, I rely on people like you to give us a sense of what's going on out there. And I know we have noticed that they are closing William Street today to do bridge repairs between West Street and Whetstone Drive, and they're planning on closing it down for 2 weeks. So did you have to reroute yourself on the way in this morning?
I had to reroute myself twice because I tried to take a detour and then it was blocked again. So
okay. So did you come in from the Western Avenue side?
Yeah,
okay.
Eventually.
That's good because now I know how I can get out. I was wondering, I was like, we're going to be trapped in here or something like that. Somebody call the fire department. We also have BCTV in here, and we always want to thank Brattleboro Savings and Loan for their financial support of our partnership with the Brattleboro Community Television. Brattleboro Savings and Loan, and ultra-local programming sponsor of BCTV live events, municipal meetings, and our segments with members of local media like Harmony Birch. Your stories, both in the print edition of The Reformer and Reformer.com in the past week, are the subjects, and most notably the series of stories you've been writing about the Bellows Falls firefighters after the village trustees voted the 4 firefighters' positions out of the budget. Really no surprise that the firefighters themselves have filed a complaint with the Department of Labor about this, and you wrote about this last Wednesday, even though the complaint dated back to the previous week. First of all, the nature of the complaint. What specifically are the firefighters saying that the village trustees have violated here?
They believe that there wasn't essentially enough time to negotiate the causes of, to negotiate the firings of the 4 full-time officers.
And it was David Bellimer who filed it. And even though that was pointed out that he was the one who filed it, he's filing it on behalf of the entire department, right? I just don't know how this works as far as labor complaints. Does one person file it and everybody sort of signs on, or would they all have to file their own individual complaints?
I'm still kind of learning. This is still a new process for me, but he is also the president of their local chapter union. So I believe that's why he filed it. It's my understanding that usually attorneys might file it, but I don't know.
Okay. Now, they're still firefighters for 120 days, and I didn't do the math to figure out when exactly that expires. But right now, they are still employed by the town, right?
Yes.
And but at some point, this is going to go away unless they figure something out. Seems like a couple of different interesting points in this complaint. One almost sounds like collusion. Is that how you're reading this when they talk about the trustee and they name Deborah Wright, the trustee, who happens to be the representative for union negotiations, possibly talking with a member of the community to make this motion?
So they didn't exactly say whether or not it was Deb Wright who did that, but they're accusing one trustee board member of possibly talking to a member of the community to get that number that was thrown out to get the budget cuts. And that's specifically
that's specifically a violation?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting to hear as far as the ins and outs of how this happens. Now they do call out Deborah Wright in another part of the complaint, though.
Yes. They say that Deb Wright has made comments about them, essentially. So it sounds like they're accusing her. I mean, maybe it is. What I'm guessing is why that's probably weighty is because she is the union negotiator, and trustees really are supposed to be impartial in terms of like personal feelings. And it sounds like they're accusing her of having some sort of personal feelings against them.
Yeah. They also mention, you mentioned, I should say, in the document listing the number of grievances filed to the Vermont Department of Labor, that union representatives are not allowed to negotiate when trustees cut fire department responses to EMS calls, and this goes back to July. So they're kind of building a case here, a timeline, it sounds like, for complaints against the trustees. Now, one of the reasons we don't know a lot about this is because you went to the village meeting last week and most of it happened behind closed doors, most of the discussion around this.
Yes.
So what were you able to try and talk to members of the trustees and members of the firefighters? Where did you get the information for this story?
Oh, okay. Well, I got this information because unfair labor practices are public documents. So I just called up the Vermont Department of Labor and they directed me to the right people and actually sent me the unfair labor practice. But I have not been able to get much information from either the firefighters or the trustee board at this time. And I think it's just because they're trying to kind of negotiate it, I think, without having to actually without the state having to come in and kind of fix their problems for them.
Right. And so, like you've asked Miles Mickle, the BF trustees chair, and is it Steve Senate? Is that how you say his name?
Yes.
The firefighter. I think he's the deputy chief.
Yes, he's the deputy.
And it's almost like a legal case at this point, as far as them not wanting to talk about it publicly.
Yeah.
Right. But you do know, fast forwarding here a couple of days, following up with the Vermont Department of Labor, that the complaint filed by Bellimer apparently has some issues with it. And you wrote about this in the Friday edition of the Brattleboro Reformer. What were some of the problems with the filing from the Bellows Falls Professional Firefighters Union?
So even though the trustee board and the village received the actual unfair labor complaint, they did not make it clear within the actual document to the state that they had received it. The firefighters didn't make it clear. So because of that, that's a problem. And another problem is that oh gosh, I can't remember now.
Well, I'll tell you what it is, because it was the thing that when I was preparing for this and reading your first story about it, and I remember reading your first story about it too, and I was wondering, what do the firefighters want to happen?
Yes, that's what it is.
At the end of this complaint. And that's a really interesting question when you're talking about the will of the voter this was a public vote to cut this amount of money out, and it was pretty overwhelming as far as the decision to cut this amount of money out of the budget. And so by filing a complaint with the Vermont Department of Labor, apparently the firefighters need to give them what they would think would be a satisfactory resolution for this. And I'm drawing a blank as to what that could be. Have you had a chance to follow up with Deputy Chief Senate or anybody on the firefighter side about that?
I keep trying to talk to them, and they would rather not discuss anything publicly at this time.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, the first part of it, just making sure that you are proving that you've delivered the complaint to the village trustees, seems to be just a red tape thing.
Yeah.
But that second part is going to be a hard thing for them to iron out and figure out what exactly they want to happen. I guess, and it has to be feasible. It can't be like, well, they have to give us our jobs back, because then you're running into this whole will of the people kind of vote thing. So going to be very interesting to see. Now, they have to have this edited by September 5th. Is that kind of your next watch space as far as what you're going to figure out to write about next?
Yes. But on September 5th, what I'll probably do is call up Timothy Noonan and be like, hey, did they edit it? Because I don't know whether or not anyone will talk to me, and then I will try to get quotes from both sides.
Right. All right. Well, we're up on a break here, but there is one other story related to the Bellows Falls Firefighters saga in terms of what are they going to do for firefighting services in the village of Bellows Falls, and we'll get to that with Harmony after the bottom of the hour news break. Back again on the Green Mountain Mornings program, Chris Lenois, continuing our conversation with Harmony Birch of the Brattleboro Reformer, and picking up where we left off, Harmony, about the Bellows Falls firefighters. We were talking a bit in that first segment about the complaint filed by the firefighters with the Vermont Department of Labor, and there's sort of a to be continued on that whole issue as they figure out how to correct the complaint and come up with what they hope to be an outcome, and hopefully work out an outcome. But in the meantime, Bellows Falls is looking at being without a fire department about approximately 120 days from now, give or take whenever the clock started on that. And there was a meeting a week ago, last Wednesday, that you covered. Your story about it is in the Friday edition of the Reformer. Number of different options discussed. Did you get a sense as to them leaning towards one versus another as far as the different things that they put forth?
Yes, I definitely think they're leaning towards an all-volunteer fire department. They actually kind of said that that's where they're going to start looking right now, and they would like to have a volunteer fire chief, which may be kind of difficult to do. They're open to the idea. It seems like of giving him some sort of stipend, which in other fire departments, I believe, would generally be about like $7,000 for the year. Or her, him or her.
Hmm.
So we'll see what they do on that.
Well, and it is, I mean, yeah, all volunteer, including whoever is in charge of the
Yes.
fire department. And that's not necessarily the norm for a volunteer fire department. I know that some places you have a fire chief who is a paid position, and then the rest of it is volunteers. And so it's an interesting choice for Bellows Falls to think about that direction to go. And I know they were also looking at Rockingham possibly covering the fires in Bellows Falls, since Bellows Falls Village is within the town of Rockingham. When that item was discussed, or when any of these items were discussed, how much agreement was there? I mean, you're talking about people in the room here who, by and large, are people who are part of either the trustees board or the select board, or even who have been part of the firefighting staff, past and present here. Was there much disagreement on some of the other options that was presented?
I don't think there was a ton of disagreement, really. I think that they were given a number what they need to work with, and we still haven't seen that $241,290 that the village of Bellows Falls needs to make up. So they're really limited in what they can do, and I think they're trying to look at the cheapest options. So everyone that was talking there that is currently a firefighter is a volunteer firefighter in a neighboring town or village or municipality of some sort. And they did all agree the volunteer firefighting department is really all they can do at this point. But they were a little bit uncertain about some of the semantics, like having a volunteer fire chief. Although a lot of these places do also have a volunteer fire chief. A lot of the, like I believe Saxon's River might have a volunteer fire chief, and I think Rockingham might also.
And something that I wasn't aware of, and maybe this is something that is normal in other towns too, the police chief, Ron Lake, has duties related to the fire department.
Yes, so he is technically the administrative fire chief. Being new to Bellows Falls, I'm really not sure how much what his roles are exactly. I know he just kind of oversees everything, and Steve Sennett, the deputy fire chief, tends to report to him. And I think it probably has to do a lot with money management, is my understanding.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I mean, if he's handling some of the administrative duties, maybe you can get away with a volunteer fire chief.
Well, I think the idea is right now, Ron Lake is stipended for that job. And I believe what will happen if they get a full-time volunteer fire chief, they'll take away that stipend from him and maybe look into giving that to the volunteer fire chief.
Okay. Now, tonight you were just telling me off the air is a joint meeting of the Bellows Falls trustees and the Rockingham Select Board. This is an agenda item. Is it specifically about the volunteer fire department, or what are they going to talk about tonight?
They have town, so the Rockingham Fire Department and Police Department are on the agenda, and I believe that is because there is some talk about maybe overlapping the services. I've heard it from Select Board member Andy Bernardo. But I don't know where the rest of the select board stands on that.
Okay. And then also tomorrow evening, 6 p.m. in the Bellows Falls Opera House, another meeting of the fire committee to continue talking about this issue. So those meetings are open to the public. If something in the Bellows Falls area has something they have want to suggest, or maybe they want to volunteer and be a firefighter, I'm sure they'd love to have some people step forward for that. Let's shift gears now. A story that you had in the Monday edition of the Brattleboro Reformer about the New England Center for Circus Arts and their open house this weekend. A lot of different students in Windham County returning to school, and maybe an extracurricular activity would be a circus class or two. You were there over the weekend?
I was there on Saturday during their open house. I was there for almost the entire open house, and
a very different vibe than the last time you were at the New England Center for Circus School, I'm sure.
Well, the last time I was there, it was actually pretty joyful too because, the new board had been elected.
You'd been there, or you're talking about the press conference with Elizabeth Wool being the new board president and Jeff Lewis and that whole kind of zaniness. Let's just leave it at that with regards to some of the impasse between the founders, Serenity and Elsie, and the previous board. It looked like a pretty good turnout from the photos that a lot of people came to check out the school.
Yeah, I talked to Serenity, and she said she really wasn't sure how many people she was expecting, but I saw a ton of people while I was there, and I left a half hour before it ended, so more people still could have filtered through. And people were having a ton of fun. They were jumping on the trampoline. They were like little kids, like climbing out of the foam pit. Like you looked in and they're just like sinking in.
Hopefully they could get out.
Yeah, they seemed happy.
Well, and that's really what the call to action was at that other meeting that I was at as well with the new board president, Elizabeth Wool, saying we need people to come and feel like this is their school and take classes or just stop by and learn a little bit more about it. But obviously, the call to action of people participating there in the programs is very helpful. You also got to talk with Jeff Lewis, the interim executive director, and I remember talking with him that day at that press conference, and he was saying he hadn't really had a chance to look at the financials at that point, but you got to get some more details from him about that.
Yes, so he has had a chance to look at the financials. They're all kind of reacquainting themselves and with the financials and just with the organization as a whole. And he seemed pleasantly surprised with the shape that the financials were in. And so a lot of what his goals are for he's agreed kind of verbally to be there for about 6 months because he's an interim president. And so his whole goal is to have people come in and evaluate the financials and get some sort of document stating that they are in good shape, essentially.
Yeah, and they are planning to go public with their accounting review from 2017, and I think that is going to be a very necessary step as far as continuing to build trust in the community about the direction that they're moving. Now, that's a little bit of news to me that he's set a deadline for when he would stop being executive director, and I'm sure it's not a hard and fast deadline, but did he say anything about the search for a permanent executive director and where that stands?
I think they're really just kind of focusing right now on kind of getting the organization back on its feet and like acquainting themselves. It doesn't sound like they're searching yet.
Okay.
And I don't think it's a hard and fast deadline.
Right. No, I don't think so either. I think Jeff is going to do what he needs to do to ensure the health of the New England Center for Circus Arts. So good luck to them. And of course, hey, go down there and check it out and watch kids sink into balls and maybe jump on a trampoline, right? That was a fun time. You didn't do any trampoline jumping?
I was wearing a skirt. I should have. I should have worn pants for that.
Was that an intentional? I'd love to jump on the trampoline, but I wore a skirt today.
No, because I really would love to jump on the trampoline.
Okay, I didn't know if you were like that was like a convenient out for you, but great reporting on that story. Also, you had a follow-up story over the weekend on the Algiers Village in Guilford and their attempts to join the Living Community Challenge. They had a meeting about it and turned out to be a pretty good turnout. How many people were at this meeting?
It was in like 40, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, something. Did I write it down somewhere? I don't know. It was about 40.
and so, yeah, I mean, you had a lot of people interested in participating in this Living Community Challenge. It sounds like it wasn't people were there saying, oh, why are we doing this? It sounds like everybody was really on board with the idea.
I think it was definitely a mix. I think people it sounded like a lot of them had read the article that was published in the Reformer, and I don't think a lot of people were super clear as to what this meeting was going to be about, which, to be fair, I wasn't really super clear. So I think that they were just going to kind of, voice their input. Some people, for example, and I don't think I wrote about this, but some people were anti-development. I don't think that was the majority, but that was something that some people were interested in saying.
Yeah,
so
they want to keep it rural. They want to keep Guilford.
Yeah, so I think that was part of the worries about the Sustainable Community Challenge thing. And I think that most people, though, had a good thing going. And the great thing about this challenge is that a lot of it right now, and probably for about at least the next year, is going to just be groundwork that will better the community, even if they don't end up completing the challenge.
Right. So no decisions made at this meeting as far as whether they're going to go forward with it.
No. It was just kind of to get community input so that they can build a better community.
Right. And whether they do the challenge or not, that's always a good thing to do. And I'm sure they'll be meeting about that again another time in the near future. And let's close our conversation with Harmony Birch of the Brattleboro Reformer today by talking about a story that you wrote. When did this come out? Over the weekend as well, about Gina DeCampo, a volunteer up in the Bellows Falls area and winning the Greater Falls Connections Active Community Engagement Award, or also the ACE Award. First of all, what is this award? What is the ACE Award?
So the ACE Award is for an unsung hero that's been volunteering or engaging in the community, just like it sounds. And it's an award that the Greater Falls Connection, which is a kind of like an anti-drug campaign within the Rockingham Bellows Falls area, gives out to community members that they feel like need some sort of spotlight on them.
Yeah, they used to call themselves the Greater Falls Prevention Coalition, which made it much more clear as to what their mission was. But now, obviously, connecting different groups. And it sounds to me like, yes, Gina is volunteering to do this, but when I read what you profiled her and everything she does, this is like her entire life. This is her career. This is her volunteer work. I mean, she just seems like somebody who's just always involved in the community.
Yeah, actually, yeah. I was asking her, I was like, what do you do for work? And she listed off a few things that she's done in the past, but this is definitely like what her main activities are. Yeah. I feel like she should be getting paid, but well, she does it for free.
Safety officer and fire prevention officer for the Saxons River Fire Department, in addition to volunteering at the Greater Falls Connections group with this Above the Influence program that they do there. Great stuff. People can read about that in the weekend edition of The Reformer from last weekend, as well as online at reformer.com. Any stories you want to tease coming up with your byline here in the coming days?
We are eventually, I need to do some work to it because it started off as like a 74-inch story, which is about like 2,000 something words, which is a lot for a paper. But we're finally going to address local community input about the Boston protests, the Boston counter protests.
Oh, great.
And that should be coming out this week.
All right. Well, yeah, sounds like you got some work to do on that, so get to work. Thanks for coming in here this morning, though.
Okay.
All right. Harmony Birch of the Brattleboro Reformer. Read her byline online at reformer.com. Back to wrap up this edition of Green Mountain Mornings after these messages.